Today's show host Matt Lauer has been fired for reported inappropriate behavior in the workplace.
For years, Matt Lauer was that guy. Charming, trusted, smiling on our screens like the perfect professional. But behind those polished suits and easy laughter was a story so dark and so shocking that when it finally came out, it didn't just dent his reputation, it absolutely destroyed it overnight.
She was really feeling extremely emotional about the hounding of the press and the paparazzi and how they were making her life miserable. So I think I did my job.
What happens to a man who once had everything? Has it all ripped away in one night? Does he fight for redemption? Does he disappear into hiding? Or does he rebuild quietly in the shadows, hoping people have short memories? Buckle up, because you won't believe where he is now. The secret that shattered a career. When people look back at the fall of Matt Lauer, they often say it was one of the most shocking downfalls in modern television history. The turning point came on November 27, 2017, when a female NBC employee, along with her lawyer, walked into NBC's Human Resources and Legal departments and filed a detailed complaint about his alleged inappropriate sexual behavior. That single complaint didn't just lead to a private HR matter. It set in motion a storm that would permanently reshape Lauer's public image and bring his once glittering career to an abrupt end. Wasn't it surprising how quickly the reputation of a man who had once been one of the most trusted faces in morning television crumbled almost overnight? Well, in this video, we'll find out in details how Matt Lauer's dark secret ended his career overnight. The first allegation that triggered everything was tied to Brooke Nevils, a former NBC News employee. At first, her name wasn't publicly known, but she later chose to reveal her identity in Ronan Farrow's 2019 book, Catch and Kill. In that book, Nevils recounted a disturbing incident during the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics. According to her, Lauer had sexually mistreated her in his hotel room. She described it as non-consensual, not only because she was too drunk to give consent, but also because, as she put it, she had said multiple times that she didn't want to engage in the act he forced upon her. The weight of those words, combined with the fact that she was speaking out years later, carried enormous impact. And as often happens in such cases, her allegation didn't remain a lone voice for long. NBC executives were soon faced with suggestions that this might not have been an isolated incident. In fact, once Nevils' story came forward, other women also stepped into the light. By the very day NBC decided to end Lauer's employment, the network had already received at least 2 more complaints about him. One of them came from a former employee who alleged that she had been mistreated by Lauer as far back as 2001 in his own office. Can one imagine how many years such stories may have been buried under silence, only to surface when one person finally broke it? What stood out most at the time was how fast NBC acted once the complaint was officially lodged. On Monday night, the company received the report. By Wednesday morning, November 29, 2017, Matt Lauer was no longer employed at the network. Andrew Lack, then the NBC News chairman, sent a memo to the staff explaining that the network had conducted a serious review and concluded the behavior was a clear violation of company standards. The decision was swift, almost ruthless in its speed, but also spoke volumes about the seriousness of the matter. As NBC put it bluntly in its public statement, Lauer's actions were appalling, horrific, and reprehensible, which was why the company felt no choice but to terminate him within 24 hours of receiving the first complaint. The reaction both inside and outside NBC was emotional, to say the least. His longtime co-anchors Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb were the ones tasked with delivering the shocking announcement on live television. They both looked visibly shaken, As Guthrie admitted, they were devastated and still processing what they had learned. Al Roker, a friend of Lauer's for more than 30 years, appeared stunned and said he, too, was trying to process the news. Wasn't it striking to see how even those closest to him, people who had shared daily mornings with him for decades, seemed blindsided by what had come to light? Outside the studio walls, the story exploded across the media landscape. Outlets like Variety and the New York Times quickly published investigative reports that contained even more troubling allegations about Lauer's past behavior. Other journalists and public figures weighed in, with CBS's Gayle King noting how the firing reflected a strong and very public zero-tolerance policy toward sexual misconduct. Even then, President Donald Trump joined the chorus on Twitter, commenting on the scandal in his usual fashion. It was as though the entire world was watching one man's career go up in flames in real time. Looking back, people couldn't help but wonder how someone who once stood as one of America's most familiar and trusted morning show hosts could have harbored such dark allegations behind the polished smile. Did the public really know the man who greeted them every morning? Or was the image carefully built, while the truth simmered behind closed doors? Whatever the answer, there was no denying that the bombshell of November 2017 forever changed not just Matt Lauer's life, but also the way audiences viewed trust, power, and accountability in the media industry. His name, once tied to warmth and reliability on screen, became a case study in how quickly everything can unravel when the truth finally catches up. And that's where the story twists even deeper, because Lauer's response wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about survival. So sit tight, because what comes next is not only shocking, but also revealing in ways that force us to question whether redemption in the spotlight is ever truly possible. Matt Lauer's response and the battle for his reputation. After his sudden dismissal from NBC, Matt Lauer found himself standing at the center of a storm that threatened to erase everything he had built over decades. People who once saw him as a trusted face on their television screens woke up to headlines that painted him in a completely different light. It was almost as if his career and public identity had been pulled out from under him overnight. And isn't it striking how quickly the image of someone can shift once certain truths, or alleged truths, come to the surface? In those first moments after his firing, he was confronted with the almost impossible task of answering to serious allegations that didn't just bruise his reputation, they nearly destroyed it beyond repair. For Lauer, the question was clear. How does a man who had spent years building trust with millions of viewers even begin to explain himself when the world has already made up its mind? Even as time passed, Lauer continued to insist that the way he had been portrayed was a distortion. He claimed that the media had deliberately shaped a narrative designed for sensational impact rather than accuracy. He pointed directly to Farrow, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, accusing him of reporting that was not only misleading, but dangerous and defamatory. According to Lauer, the facts had been twisted, the details had been exaggerated, and his entire image had been reshaped into a version of himself that he did not recognize. But then again, isn't it often said that once a story catches fire in the public eye, the truth, whatever it may be, becomes harder and harder to separate from perception? In his attempt to regain control of that perception, Lauer tried multiple strategies. He timed his public statements to coincide with big developments, as though he could sway the public conversation back in his favor. He leaned on allies who spoke for him in certain circles, carefully choosing when and where to present himself. And behind the curtain, his legal team was active, sending warnings and threatening legal action against outlets that published stories he claimed were unfair or inaccurate. This wasn't just a fight for his career. It was a fight for his name, for the way history would remember him. Yet it raised another question. Was this persistence a sign of someone wrongly accused trying to clear his name? Or was it the last effort of a man desperately trying to hold on to what had already slipped away? Through it all, what became most clear was the gap between Lauer's version of events and the version that stuck in the public imagination. He insisted that he was misrepresented, misunderstood, and mistreated by the media. He argued that not all of the claims made against him were rooted in truth, but the broader public conversation rarely allowed him the benefit of doubt. Once an adored morning host, he was now viewed by many as a symbol of abuse of power in the workplace. And perhaps that is what made his attempts to control the narrative so striking. Despite the careful words, the legal maneuvers, and the well-timed denials, the court of public opinion had already made its judgment. Could anything he said ever truly erase what had already been decided in the minds of millions? That was the battle Matt Lauer faced, and it was a battle he seemed destined to lose, no matter how long or how loud he fought. His journey after the spotlight is just as telling, just as dramatic, and if you stick with me till the very end, you'll see how it shaped not only his future, but the way the world continues to view him to this very day. Life after the spotlight. The personal aftermath of Matt Lauer's scandal was described as something that completely turned his life upside down. People said that the fall from grace did not just take away his career, but also shook the very foundation of his home and family life. His marriage to Annette Roque, which many believed had already been facing its own share of struggles before the allegations, could not survive the weight of everything that came afterward. When the scandal broke, what chance did the relationship have against the glare of public scrutiny and constant judgment? Annette eventually filed for divorce in July 2019, nearly 2 years after his firing from the Today Show. Reports claimed the settlement cost him a staggering amount, around $20 million, which included properties like their horse farm in the Hamptons. Yet, in the middle of the bitterness and hurt, there was one thing they both seemed to agree on: protecting their children. Insiders explained that they had promised each other to be civil, to avoid showing any tension in front of the kids, and to put their well-being before everything else. This was not just empty talk either. Their effort was noticed when they showed up together at their daughter Romy's high school graduation in 2022. Isn't it telling that even broken families can sometimes still unite when it matters most? But life after such a scandal rarely stops at divorce. Alongside the collapse of his marriage, Lauer also saw the unraveling of his social world. It was said that he had cut off many old friends, even some who had stood by him when the Today Show ended for him. The circle of people he could lean on grew smaller and smaller, until it was reduced to just a few trusted confidants. Among them was his former colleague, Bryant Gumbel, who reportedly gave him encouragement and a sense of inspiration in those dark years. But really, how must it feel for someone who was once one of the most recognized faces on American television to suddenly find himself isolated with only a handful of friends left? The contrast could not be more striking. From being surrounded by applause, attention, and invitations, he moved into a world where he kept mostly to himself. As the dust of his public downfall settled, his lifestyle shifted dramatically. Lauer sold off his lavish Hamptons mansion and chose to spend much of his time in New Zealand, at a farm property where he was said to feel some sense of peace. Those who knew him remarked that his life now looked nothing like what it once was. The glamour, the spotlight, and the constant media buzz had been replaced with something quieter, almost reclusive. People close to him said his days had become very calm, stripped of the noise and rush that had once defined his career. One could not help but wonder, was this quiet life something he learned to embrace as a form of healing? Or was it simply the only option left for a man the world had turned away from? The story of Matt Lauer after his scandal reveals how quickly fortunes can change. In just a few short years, he went from being a household name, admired and respected, to a figure living in near isolation. Some would say he brought it all upon himself, while others might point out the human side of his journey, the broken marriage, the effort to remain present for his children, the loneliness of losing friends, and the attempt to find peace in faraway lands. A new chapter in Matt Lauer's life. Today, Matt Lauer's story has taken a quiet turn ever since his very public fall from grace, and those who once saw him on their television screens every morning would probably be surprised at how different his life looks today. People close to him have said that he has spent the last few years carefully piecing together a private life, far away from the chaos of cameras and constant headlines. Instead of chasing the spotlight, he now splits his time between his remaining properties, focusing more on rebuilding trust and repairing relationships with those closest to him. Isn't it interesting how someone who was once a household name could suddenly choose such a different rhythm of life, one built not around fame, but around silence and slow healing? When his marriage ended, he eventually found companionship again, this time with public relations executive Shamin Abbas. Reports said their friendship had stretched over 15 years before romance entered the picture in December 2019. And the two seemed to have slipped into a relationship that felt steady, yet intentionally shielded from too much public attention. They have been described as serious but private, rarely seen outside of familiar corners of the Hamptons. And doesn't that raise the thought, after so many years of living in the public's gaze, could privacy itself be the greatest luxury he now clings to? While Lauer has clearly stepped back from the public eye, he has not disappeared completely. Every so often, locals catch sight of him at restaurants or small shops in New York and Florida. He was even spotted at his son's high school graduation, where he reportedly kept a respectful distance from his former wife, choosing not to turn a family milestone into a scene. Sometimes he is said to join intimate gatherings with the small group of friends who never abandoned him during the height of his scandal. One might wonder, in moments like that, if loyalty shown during the darkest times becomes far more valuable than applause once offered during the brightest ones. Of course, whispers about a possible return to media still follow him. Every few months, rumors swirl that he is exploring ways to re-enter the conversation, with talk of him creating a digital show or podcast where he could finally shape his own narrative. Industry insiders have claimed that he has at least considered these options, but nothing real has taken form. After all, who would want to take the risk of being associated with him, given the weight of the controversy still tied to his name? And isn't that the question that lingers over every rumor, whether the world is truly ready or even willing to hear his voice again in such a public way? In the middle of all this, a handful of familiar figures have offered words of support, though often in careful tones. Hoda Kotb, for example, has shared nuanced thoughts about Lauer's downfall, acknowledging the complexity of the situation without outright defending him. Still, many of his past industry friends have kept a deliberate distance, protecting their own reputations and careers. For Lauer, it seems the strongest support comes not from famous faces, but from old friends, those who knew him before television ever turned him into a household name. Could it be that when the spotlight fades, those are the only people whose voices really matter? The debate about his redemption, however, remains heated and deeply divided. On one side, critics argue that the harm he caused cannot be erased, and that any attempt to reclaim a public role would only reopen wounds for the women affected. On the other side, some voices believe in second chances, saying that with enough accountability and genuine growth, even someone with his past should not be permanently excluded from professional life. And isn't that the eternal question society always wrestles with? How long should a person carry the weight of their mistakes? And is forgiveness something that can ever truly be earned in the public eye? For now, Matt Lauer lives in a quieter world, balancing whispers of the past with an uncertain future. His days may no longer be measured by ratings or headlines, but by small, personal steps toward rebuilding a life that once seemed shattered beyond repair. Whether he remains in the shadows or one day tries to step back into the spotlight, the world seems far from ready to forget his story. But maybe the bigger question is not whether people will forget, but whether they will ever forgive. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.